The sky over Valis Enclave churned with shades of ash and violet, light from the orbital platforms above bleeding down like wounded suns. The city was supposed to be safe. That's what they'd always told Ilian Delvin. But on the night the Enclave Defense Corps came for his mother, the illusion shattered like glass under boots. They arrived without warning. At 2:13 Standard Time, with no warrants, no public record of her being under investigation, four armored personnel carriers screamed down from the sky and converged on the modest, ivy-strewn research station at the city's edge. Their thrusters scorched the garden plots Nair Delvin had tended after lectures. Ilian had just risen to get a drink from the kitchen when the front wall exploded inward. The entire moment felt unreal. Soldiers in matte gray exosuits flooded the building. Drones buzzed overhead, scanning, recording, red lenses blinking like insectoid eyes. A voice barked orders in standard intersect. Target secured. No civilian resistance. Begin extraction. Ilian stood frozen, watching his mother be dragged out of her study, still holding a stylus in one hand and a half-drunk cup of tea in the other. Ilian. Stay back. It was the last thing she said before they forced her to her knees and clamped binding cuffs around her wrists, neural dampeners clicking shut with an audible charge. They didn't even let him say goodbye. 3 hours later, Ilian sat numbly on the concrete steps outside the sealed ruins of their home. The soldiers had gone. The drones had disappeared. And so had his mother. He watched the sky without blinking, trying to trace the vapor trail of the ship that had taken her. Above, orbital lanes glittered with military traffic. He knew where they had taken her. Everyone did. The Orvan Bastille, a rotating high-orbit prison designed for war criminals and enemies of the state. Not a place for a xenoanthropologist. Not for someone who taught non-human literature and historical empathy at Valis University. They say she was working with insurgents, said Tessa, his classmate, when she messaged later that day. There's a press release. Says she passed information to off-world rebels. Ilian stared at the screen. Breaking, Professor Nair Delvin detained on charges of treason, conspiracy, and alien collusion. High Chancellor Strom has endorsed swift tribunal proceedings. There were no tribunal proceedings. No legal transcripts. No right to a defense. The system didn't need them anymore. Not under the emergency authority protocols passed during the second expansion conflict. Guilt was presumed. Silence was punishment. But Ilian knew his mother. She'd dedicated her life to building peace across species lines. Her lectures were archived publicly, her communication records open for scholarly review. She wasn't a rebel. She was a pacifist. And someone wanted her gone. Ilian accessed his mother's university console that night. Officially, it had been locked, but he knew the back door she'd shown him for emergencies. He typed in a glyphic override and decrypted the system logs. Nothing unusual. No unauthorized access. No warning signs. Then he found a sealed folder tagged with a designation he didn't recognize, Project Veil Shift, Z29. The folder was corrupted. Encrypted twice. It took him 6 hours and a stolen brute force algorithm to crack it. Inside were fragments of audio logs and video snippets. Some were incomplete. Others had no metadata. But the final entry stopped him cold. It showed Nair meeting with a human officer, someone in Defense Corps regalia. They stood in a university lab, arguing. Nair's voice trembled with anger. This is not a weapon. This is cultural data from the Valari. You cannot just confiscate it. The man stepped forward, voice cold. Everything that relates to non-human origin falls under strategic control now. You're interfering with planetary security. These are poems. Linguistic histories. Not encryption keys. We decide what's a threat. Not you. The feed cut off. Ilian felt the first sting of tears. The next day, he tried to access the judicial archives. They denied his request. There was no record of a case against his mother. No documentation. She had simply been disappeared. In desperation, he sent a blind message to a private encryption ring used by low-tier civil servants. The sort who knew things but never had power to act. He didn't expect anyone to answer. But someone did. The man arrived at dusk. He looked like an archivist, gray tunic, worn coat, a datapad tucked under his arm. Arco Lien. Clerk grade analyst, Judicial Sector 11B. 37 years old. Nervous smile. You sent a query through Lupeconet. About your mother. Nair Delvin. Ilian nodded. I didn't think anyone would answer. Most wouldn't. But I remember her lectures. She was the only reason I understood how to pass the alien linguistics cert. Ilian stared. Arco lowered his voice. Listen. Her case file was marked as classified under Order Black Seal. That's only supposed to apply to national emergencies or covert operations. But she's a teacher. And I checked, she doesn't have a security index high enough to warrant that. So why? Because someone made it so. And because it's tied to something bigger. Something called Project Veilshift. Ilian's blood ran cold. She had a folder with that name. What is it? Arco shook his head. Nobody knows. But files tagged with that designation are being pulled from research institutions all over the planet. Academic papers, alien cultural records, even art collections. And they're being rerouted to an undisclosed military archive. They think art is a threat. Or maybe it contains something they don't want others to see. 2 days later, Ilian met Yesamorix. She arrived in a cracked hover bike, her face hidden behind an adaptive faceplate. Former journalist. Fired during the enforcement purge of 2421. Now ran a pirated broadcast channel called Voice Below. Heard you're the son of a political ghost, she said without preamble. That makes you dangerous. Also useful. She offered him a data chip. Proof that they're tampering with the judicial system. Case counts vanish. Surveillance footage spliced. I want to air your mother's story. Make them choke on their silence. Ilian hesitated. If we go public, they'll come for us. They're already coming. Might as well make it worth it. Together, they unearthed more footage. Snippets of Nair speaking at cultural symposiums. Archives of her quoting alien poets. Her students defending her. A public record of peace. But the regime had painted her as a terrorist. See this? Yesa tapped a clip. They took this footage of your mom reading a Valari chant and added footage from a spaceport bombing. Totally unrelated. But it ran on state broadcasts as one montage. They faked the link. No, they manufactured it. Ilian clenched his fists. Then we'll show the truth. But as they prepared their broadcast, another message arrived through the back channel. From the Orvan Bastille. Director Halker Mern. Subject, Prisoner Transfer Authorization, Delvin, Nair. Clearance level, Red Rain. Ilian decoded the file. The transfer was not to another prison. It was to a classified facility in lunar orbit. No return. No oversight. No record. They were planning to erase her. Permanently. He stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he stood. I'm going up there, he said. Arco paled. That's suicide. No. It's justice. His voice was calm. Steady. Cold. If they want to bury the truth, then we'll make it too loud to ignore. Ilian Delvin had never known what fear truly was until the day he decided to fight back. Not hide. Not plead. Fight. With nothing but fragments of data, two unlikely allies, and a stolen map of a military orbital prison, he was going to attempt what no one had in the last 20 years, reach the Orvan Bastille and bring someone back. The idea alone was heresy. But then, so was telling the truth. He hunched over the flickering holodeble in Yessa Morix's underground bunker, what used to be a textile warehouse in the pre-unification era, and studied the lines of firewalls, drone patrols, and encryption pulses radiating from the prison's mainframe. The Bastille floated in perpetual dark orbit, its position shifting by randomized vector realignments every 24 hours. No public log. No digital trace. Only a ghost drifting above the world it served. Arco Lien, for all his nervous mannerisms, had proven invaluable. His clearance may have been low, but his knowledge of judicial routing protocols, hidden emergency overrides, and forgotten system redundancies made him the ultimate infiltrator by proxy. Now he stood beside Ilian with a datapad tucked under one arm and sweat beading his brow. I can get us a trace ping on her neural cuffs. Once every 11 minutes, the system logs biosignal anomalies. That's our window, he muttered. Ilian nodded. Do it. Yessa lit a cigarette, the old-world kind that burned paper instead of digitized Eros. And what exactly are you going to do once you locate her? Ilian's voice was quiet. I'm going to broadcast her story. To everyone. The first test was small. A doctored video clip, spliced by Yessa's team of underground editors and voice emulators. Senator Wallström appeared before an audience of fabricated dignitaries, admitting that the charges against Nair Delvin were exaggerated, that she had never posed a direct threat. It was, of course, entirely false. But it was also viral. Within hours, it had spread across private networks, jumped to dissident colonies on Europa and Vesta, and sparked a series of protests in 5 cities across Earth. The regime responded by calling it deepfake treason. But the damage was done. Doubt had been sown. Do you know why they're so scared of what your mother knows? Yessa asked one night, as they huddled around a cracked heat radiator in the lower levels. Ilian didn't look up. Because it proves they've been lying. Worse. Because she documented everything. What do you mean? Yessa handed him a shard, a data prism etched with raw footage. Arco found this in the redundancy buffer of her university archives. It's a field recording. She's talking to a Valari priestess. They're reciting something ancient. A text that, well, let's just say it contradicts everything the Defense Corps says about first contact. Ilian inserted the shard into the projector. The room filled with low tones, rhythmic and haunting. An alien voice, sonorous, shimmering, followed by his mother's calm translations. And so we gave them the paths of light, and they returned it with blades. But still, we held the promise, that one day, they would listen. A chill ran down his spine. They came to us for refuge, Yessa whispered. And we turned them into villains. Meanwhile, aboard the Orvan Bastille, Nair Delvin sat in a sterile cell, lightless and quiet save for the occasional hum of atmosphere regulators. Her mind drifted between clarity and confusion, side effects, she knew, of the neural suppression fields. They dulled cognition, slowed memory, made identity bleed. But she clung to one thing. Her son's face. Even when the interrogations began, Director Halker Mern standing like a steel sculpture across the table, asking questions with dead eyes, she said nothing. Not out of resistance. Out of purpose. She would not give them what they wanted, a confession. A false narrative. A justification. Your research, Mern said during the 5th session, was a liability. To whom? She rasped. To civilization. She smiled then, despite the pain. Then civilization must be fragile indeed. Back on Earth, Arco flagged an anomaly. Got it. Her neural tag just pinged, confirmation pulse through channel V92. That's lunar bound. She's being transferred. Transferred where? Ilian demanded. Arco looked grim. Facility 9K. That's not a prison. That's termination. Ilian turned to Yessa. We have to move. Now. She flicked her cigarette stub into a drain. I know someone. A pilot. Used to run ghost routes during the Trinary uprisings. We'll need a ship. They met Commander Rivenholt in a scrapyard on the shadow side of the polar ridge. He didn't look like much, gray beard, missing eye, a limp that slowed his step, but when he saw Ilian, he gave a slow, approving nod. Your mother once spoke at the academy, he said. She made us believe peace was worth fighting for. I deserted a month later. Figured the war didn't deserve her words. You'll help us? I'll fly you to hell if it means sticking it to Strom. The ship they used was old but agile, the Sindral. A modified survey vessel with cloaking panels and internal EMP silencers. Yessa patched together a network scrambler. Arco wrote intrusion scripts designed to mimic command authority backdoors. And Ilian. Ilian loaded the one thing that mattered. The truth. They launched under cloud cover. Their goal was not to land on the Bastille, impossible. Instead, they would intercept the prisoner transfer ship mid-transit. As they rose through the mesosphere, chased by warning pings from orbital patrol drones, Ilian sat strapped in beside Riven and whispered a promise. I'm coming, Mother. Hold on. The prisoner transport vessel drifted like a silent coffin above the pale curve of Earth's upper atmosphere, its hull glinting faintly under the starlight. Inside, Nair Delvin sat shackled in a medical harness that barely allowed movement. The cuffs on her wrists were heavier than the ones she'd worn in Orvan Bastille. These weren't just neural dampeners, they were suppression bonds meant to dull everything. Thought. Memory. Even dreams. But one thing burned through it all. Ilian. She could still picture his face that night, the tea in her hand, the stylus half lifted, his silhouette in the hallway. It haunted her, not as a wound, but as a tether. The world was unraveling around her, yet that image kept her anchored. Status, came the curt voice of the officer on the bridge. 2 hours to Facility 9K, replied the pilot. Trajectory stable. Escort drones confirmed. Keep them tight. This one's high priority. Nair listened. They weren't hiding the transfer anymore. They didn't care. The trial of her life was about to be written in silence. On board the Sindral, Ilian Delvin gripped the edge of the control console as the ship slid into stealth vectoring. He felt the subtle change in pressure as the hull contracted for maximum friction resistance, the kind of maneuver that only older vessels with manual overrides could still perform. Coming up on intercept course, Rivenholt muttered. His lone eye flicked between proximity sensors and trajectory overlays. We got 5 minutes before the escort drones ping us. Arco's hands blurred over a makeshift control rig. He was feeding their digital signature through a masking net designed to mimic maintenance haulers. I can fool them for a minute. Maybe 90 seconds. No more. That'll be enough, Ilian said. Yessa checked her rifle, a non-lethal disruptor calibrated to breach doors and disable suits. Once we breach, you go for your mother. I'll handle crew suppression. Riven holds the ship. Arco keeps the jamming net up. Ilian didn't respond. He was already moving. The breach was fast. Sindral fired a burst of magnetic hooks onto the transport's dorsal seam. The docking bay ripped open. Vacuum screamed, and Yessa was the first through the breach, rolling into cover and pulsing a shock burst into the first guard's armor. Ilian followed. Inside was chaos, automated alarms howled, and red emergency lighting painted everything in blood-hued shadows. He sprinted down the corridor, relying on the ship's schematics Yessa had acquired through a compromised military engineer. Level 4. Bay 7. His mother was in the last cabin. He found her slumped against the wall, her blue jumpsuit soaked with sweat, eyes barely open. Ilian?" The voice was cracked, barely audible. He dropped to his knees and pulled her close. "I'm here. I'm here. We have to go." She was lighter than he remembered. Her skin was cold, and the dampeners had etched burn marks into her neck. But she was alive. And she was looking at him like he was the sun. They made it back to the Syndrel just as the escort drones realized something was wrong. Arco rerouted a proximity alarm into a false detonation signal, which bought them 30 seconds. Just enough. Yessa dragged a half-stunned officer into the hold and locked the entry hatch. "That one'll tell a good story when they find him." If they find him. Riven reversed their thrusters and dropped the ship into a low-decline re-entry spiral. Ilian held Nair close in the back of the medbay. She slept, barely conscious, clinging to the warmth of his arms. For the first time in weeks, his mind was quiet. Director Halker Mern watched the footage of the failed transfer in silence. Behind him, Senator Wallstrom loomed in the shadows of the secure communications chamber. "You said this was impossible," Strom hissed. "You said she was contained." Mern didn't flinch. And she was. Until someone with access orchestrated a breach. It was her son. Then her son had help. Military-grade interference. Civilian cooperation. They have reach. Then crush them. Mern turned slowly. And risk turning her into a martyr. Into a movement. Strom's mouth twitched. Then make them disappear. All of them. Quietly. Mern nodded. "We'll need to act fast. Before they speak." Back at the underground compound, the team regrouped. Yessa had set up 3 redundant uplinks. Arco was parsing the recovered data from Nair's prison files, interrogation logs, medical records, transfer orders. Each line painted a clearer picture of state-sanctioned suppression. Ilian sat with his mother, who now rested in a converted clinic bed under sterile light. Her breathing had stabilized. Her voice returned. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "I couldn't let them erase you." She smiled. A tired, proud smile. "Then we tell them everything. We will. Tomorrow. Global broadcast. All channels." Yessa set up the rig with the precision of a surgeon. They had 6 minutes of uninterrupted relay time before orbital net monitors would spike the signal. Arco stood by to release the digital cache as a follow-up. Ilian sat beside his mother. She was ready. When the countdown hit 0, the entire planet saw her face. Nair Delvin, pale but unbroken, looked into the lens and spoke. "My name is Nair Delvin. I was condemned without evidence. Labeled an enemy of the state. Tortured. Nearly executed. Not because of what I did, but because of what I knew." Her voice, calm and steady, told the story. Of Project Veilshift. Of the Valari history. Of the fake charges, the doctored broadcasts, the fabricated enemy the government used to stay in power. And then Ilian spoke. He told the world what they had done. How a boy with no military training, no political clout, had uncovered the truth. Rescued the condemned. And shown that lies could be broken. It took 6 minutes to change everything. By dawn, half the world was in the streets. Senator Strom disappeared from public record. Director Mern went into emergency seclusion. But it was too late. The story had already shaken nations. They didn't sleep the night after the broadcast. Ilian paced the length of the makeshift clinic while Nair rested, her vitals stable but her mind constantly racing. Yessa monitored the secure feeds, watching the globe's pressure valves rupture. Civilian unrest in 72 cities. Military deployments recalled from the outer colonies. Government feeds replaced by mirror-cast insurgent broadcasts. The empire, long unshakable, now trembled. "They're preparing a counteroffensive," Yessa said. Her voice was tense, eyes fixed on the flickering grid. And not just propaganda. They've greenlit Operation Crossveil. Ilian frowned. That sounds made up. It's not. It's what they call the Marshall Response to Internal Collapse. I saw it activated once, during the Erethan secession riots. Took out an entire district. Arco looked up from the coding station where he was encrypting Nair's research into a decentralized archive. If they're mobilizing for Crossveil, we have a day at most before they come for us. Rivenholt emerged from the shadows, arms crossed over his chest. Then we don't wait. We hit them first. The plan was simple. Impossible, but simple. Break into the Orvan Bastille. Again. But not to save just one prisoner. This time, they would liberate everyone the regime had silenced. Political thinkers, alien diplomats, whistleblowers, and rebel scientists. And they wouldn't do it alone. The public uprising had stirred old networks, former operatives, disillusioned officials, rogue AI clusters with loyalty to the truth. One by one, they came forward. Offering intel. Offering ships. Offering their lives. Ilian stood at the head of this growing web of resistance. Not because he wanted to, but because no one else could. His name had become a symbol. The boy who broke silence. And now, he would lead the storm. The Orvan Bastille's security systems were legendary. A three-tier defense grid composed of satellite-linked turrets, electromagnetic suppression fields, and auto-targeting drones. The prison rotated in high orbit with a dynamic cloaking vector that changed every 24 hours. But they had an advantage. Riven had once helped build the damn thing. He called it an abomination of paranoia. There's a maintenance shaft under the equatorial array, he said, voice gravel rough as he traced a flight path onto the holomap. It vents plasma from the reactor every 6 hours. For 75 seconds, the outer shields drop. That's our entry point. Won't the reactor incinerate us? Ilian asked. If our angle's wrong by a hair, yes. But if we hit it at the right moment, like threading a needle, we slip through. How big is the gap? Wide enough for a fighter. Barely. They launched with 5 ships. The Syndrel, now reinforced with heat plating. 3 scavenged interceptors, each piloted by a volunteer from the newly formed Dawn Accord. And a stealth transport loaded with infiltration personnel, medics, tacticians, and engineers who'd once served the regime and now burned to see it fall. As the orbital clock ticked toward the vent cycle, Ilian felt his stomach tighten. Beside him, Nair strapped herself in. She insisted on coming. I'm not staying behind while you risk your life for what I started, she said. Ilian didn't argue. The vent opened. They dove in. Riven piloted with the precision of a surgeon on the brink of madness. The reactor's glow turned the cockpit white. Plasma arced meters from their hull. Every second was a brush with death. But they made it. Inside the maintenance corridor, Arco flooded the system with a series of looped false signals, making the internal monitors believe they were still clean. Yessa led the breach squad through the lower corridors. Shock bursts fired. Guards fell, unconscious. Door by door, they reached the holding levels. And there, row by row, were the forgotten. It took 20 minutes to override the cell grid. When the locks disengaged, silence fell. The prisoners didn't cheer. They didn't move. They stared. Ilian stepped forward. You're free. Come with us. An alien diplomat named Thurin Vask, a four-armed dignitary from Sylar Prime, spoke first. You were her eyes, he said, staring at Nair. We thought you were gone. She stepped beside her son. We came back. And now we leave together. They moved fast. The facility's central AI, once neutral, now corrupted by the regime, woke halfway through the extraction. Unauthorized movement detected. Initiating lockdown. Deploying automated defenses. Gun turrets unfolded from the ceiling. Walls reconfigured into traps. Ilian and Yessa led the charge, carving a path with EMP disruptors and hacked control rods. Arco rerouted power nodes to collapse bridges behind them. Nair carried data cores, memory drives of those who hadn't survived, their knowledge salvaged. They lost 3 volunteers in the escape. But they gained 93 prisoners. They fled through a breach point opened by the interceptors. The Syndro led the escape run. Turrets locked on. Drones launched. And then the rebel satellites ignited. 57 orbital mirrors, reprogrammed by rogue AIs, bounced a signal burst through the ionosphere. A flash of data, amplified into every public channel. A cascade of stories. Faces. Names. Atrocities. Proof. The Empire's walls cracked. By the time the Syndrel touched down at the Dawn Accord safe zone in the Arctic Reclamation Sector, the world had already changed. The Senate chambers were under siege from within. Strome's enforcers turned on each other. Entire military divisions refused orders. And Nair Delvin, once a condemned scholar, walked into the light surrounded by former prisoners who now stood as witnesses. Ilian watched the sun rise over the frost-broken ice fields and finally allowed himself a breath. The cage had been broken. But the reckoning was still to come. Snow fell softly across the Arctic horizon as the last remnants of night gave way to amber dawn. The Dawn Accord camp, now a sprawling hub of resistance activity, buzzed with encrypted communications, reconstructed tech, and the quiet murmurs of a planet trying to right itself after a storm of lies. In the center of it stood Nair Delvin. No longer in tattered prison clothes, she wore a sleek robe of deep gray, woven with the insignia of unity, the sigil now adopted by dozens of Earth's major districts. Her violet eyes shimmered with fatigue and quiet resolve as she stood on the open platform before a global broadcast uplink. The wind tugged gently at the strands of silver in her dark hair. Ilian stood beside her, taller now in spirit than he'd ever been in stature. His voice, once tremulous, had become a blade of purpose. Today, they would speak. Not in secret. Not from shadows. But before the entire world. Yessa adjusted the final relays. Arco gave a thumbs up. The uplink synced. "We are live," Yessa confirmed. "Planet-wide, plus off-world relays. You're about to be heard in every colony from Mars to the edge sectors." Nair stepped forward. "People of Earth. Citizens of the known colonies. My name is Nair Delvin. I was once a teacher, a researcher of culture and peace. Then I became a prisoner. Not for any crime. But because I refused to let truth be rewritten." She paused. Her gaze did not waver. "I was silenced because I discovered that our government was lying to you. That the Volari were not invaders. That Project Veil Shift was not a defense strategy, but a censorship operation designed to erase histories, cultures, and peaceful contact records." Ilian stepped forward. "My name is Ilian Delvin. I am her son. I broke into government archives, confronted the lies with evidence, and risked my life to save hers. We did not do this alone. Thousands helped. Some died. But all stood for one truth, that justice is meaningless without honesty." Images flooded the broadcast, the rescued prisoners, the memory cores, the documents Arco decrypted, the faces of those lost to the regime's hidden prisons. It was undeniable. Yessa transitioned to live footage from the Senate chamber, where independent factions had detained Senator Wallstrom. He sat shackled at a tribunal table, flanked by guardbots, staring ahead with blank defiance. "This is the man who sanctioned my mother's imprisonment," Ilian said. "Who manipulated intelligence. Fabricated terror. Turned compassion into a crime. Let him be the last," Nair said. "Not of a political party. But of a way of ruling. A way that used fear to divide us. Over the next 3 hours, witnesses came forward. The rescued. The former guards. Military defectors. Alien diplomats once held in secret. A four-armed Valari elder, Duran Vask, addressed the tribunal via holofeed. We came to your world seeking sanctuary. We were met with shackles. But today, I see your world changing. And I choose to hope. Then came Riven Halt. I built part of the Bastille. Believed it would protect peace. Instead, it imprisoned it. I swore I would never obey again. And now, I serve truth. Yessa spoke last. You call us rebels. We call ourselves believers. In transparency. In compassion. In unity that doesn't erase. The tribunal vote came 2 days later. Wallström was found guilty on 23 counts of conspiracy, unlawful imprisonment, falsification of public records, and crimes against sentient beings. He was sentenced to life, not in prison, but in open servitude. To build, with his hands, the same shelters he had once denied others. Ilian and Nair declined to attend the sentencing. They had other work to do. A new council was formed. Not a ruling body. But a rotating assembly of representatives from Earth, the colonies, and allied alien species. The Council of Continuance. Dedicated to truth retention, historical preservation, and justice without erasure. Nair Delvin was named its first custodian. Ilian declined an official title. I'm just a son who refused to lose his mother, he said. But in every street mural, every banner across rebuilt cities, it was his name people sang. Weeks later, on the old steps of the Valis University ruins, Ilian stood alone. He ran his hand across the cracked stone of his mother's former lecture hall, now reconstructed into a public archive. Inside were recordings of her classes, her notes, and the original Valari linguistic files she'd fought so hard to preserve. A girl approached. Young. Maybe 14. She held a notepad. Are you Ilian Delvin? He smiled. Depends who's asking. They say you broke into the stars for your mother. Is that true? Not just for her. For all of us. Will you teach me how to do that? He knelt, met her gaze. I'll show you how to fight with truth. The rest, you'll discover yourself. Later that night, back at the Accord headquarters, Ilian found Nair in the central gardens. She was barefoot, kneeling beside a plot of alien soil where Valari herbs had begun to grow under Earth's cold stars. It smells like home, she whispered. It is home now, he said. She reached up, touched his face. Thank you. He covered her hand with his. For surviving? Or for fighting? For believing. Even when I couldn't. That night, the stars above Earth shimmered with returning satellites. Ships filled with survivors. Diplomats. Families. A new chapter began. And in its center stood a mother and a son. Not warriors. Just people who refused to let truth die.